Before we get into the stories, make sure you check out Donovan Dread Discovers, where I go over strange and weird videos from around the world. I release several times a week. Also, sign up for the weekly email at dreadsarmy.com so you don't miss any updates. Hey Donovan, one hell of a story to share. Writing from Yellowstone National Park here. Been working as a park ranger for about 2 years now. Always loved the outdoors, so I thought this was the perfect job for me. Keep the park clean, make sure visitors are safe. You know the drill. Yellowstone's not all just old faithful and magnificent landscapes, though. It's got its share of the wild and the weird. But the story I'm about to tell you trumps everything I've ever experienced here. So, I was just doing my routine rounds one late afternoon, checking for any lost items, mending some of the older trail signs, the usual. Anyway, I walked past one of our old field offices that we didn't use anymore. An old wooden hut, must have been built in the 60s or 70s. It was always locked up tight and we're not given access to it. I mean, why would anyone care about an old beat-up shack, right? But that day, I noticed the door ajar. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to check it out, thinking it might just be kids messing around or some wild animal that had found its way in. That's where I stumbled upon these old files, covered in a thick layer of dust, shoved in a beaten-up filing cabinet. The most intriguing of all files was this one that contained a detailed underground map. Now, I know the layout of this park like the back of my hand, but this map, it made no sense. It showcased large chambers, corridors, entire structures located deep beneath the park areas. Give me a moment to paint this visual for you. Imagine a huge mind map turned into an old-school Dungeons & Dragons dungeon sketch. Only these were no dungeons. The strange map details were annotated with distances, exact coordinates, and, the weirdest part, containment cell numbers. It was like something out of a sci-fi horror movie. A creepy water-stained yellowed map marking an underground facility that no one in the park management knew existed. There was this faint scent to the map. Off-putting, sour, bit like rotten eggs, I reckon. Can't really put a finger on it, it was quite bowl over. Right after I'd studied the map more closely, I started to hear this low, deep sound coming from below the shack. A grumble, kind of like a moan morphing into a long, drawn-out growl. Now I've heard a fair share of wild animal sounds, lived around them long enough. But this, Donovan, this was something completely different, deeper, scarier. It reverberated through the shack, stronger with each passing second. Just as this chilling sound wrapped up its eerie symphony, there was a knock that echoed through the chambers. A loud, thrumming knock, one that makes you feel like you're on the edge of a long-forgotten abyss. The map, the sound, the knock, everything seemed to conjoin into creating this unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. I felt an overwhelming strangeness, a feeling I wish upon no one. Decided to call it a day and make a swift exit from the shack. On one of the future occasions, I decided to ask my supervisor about the old field office and what it might have housed in the past. I decided to dig deeper into this mystery. Now, I wasn't exactly part of an X-Files episode, but I pretty much felt like it. I followed that old map, and it led me into the belly of Yellowstone, to places not seen by casual visitors or even most of my fellow park rangers. Not gonna lie to you, I was nervous as all hell. The place had an eerie vibe to it. The deeper I went, the worse the smell got. Really putrid, like old rotten garbage. It was damp and cold, and darker than night itself. My flashlight did little to pierce the gloom, but I carried on. I made my way through husky corridors, across damp earth, under cobweb-laden arches. Not gonna lie, the ambience was unnerving, and couple that with the low moaning sound I could hear from deep within. Not quite the outdoor adventure I had in mind. Okay, worst part? I felt like I wasn't alone, like I kept hearing this huffing noise, like a large animal. Now I'd say I was used to dealing with animals during my day-to-day work, but this felt different. Worse, because that huffing was followed by this guttural sort of grunting sound. That's when I saw it. My flashlight beam illuminated a massive shape, I nearly dropped the flashlight as it reflected off red fur. I'd seen loads of animals out in the wild, Donovan, but I ain't ever encountered anything that tall and hulking in my life. The damn thing had to be at least 8 feet tall. It was bulky, powerful, the kind of beast that could uproot trees and men alike with relative ease. Its head towered fluorescently in my flashlight. Its facial features were hard to make out in the dull light, but it had a pronounced forehead, a pronounced jawline, deep-set eyes, and a broad cheek. But the worst was its smell, a vile combination of spoiled meat and damp earth. Now, I've heard stories, of course. Every seasoned outdoorsman has. Stories of the Sasquatch. But those are just tales spun by campfires and in the corners of old man bars. But standing that close to such a monster staring at it, I was frozen with fear. In the next few moments, the beast let out a prolonged howl, so loud and deep it froze my blood. It sent shivers down my spine, and then it was just gone. It banged the ground hard one time, like a warning knock, before rushing off into the outward darkness. I didn't stick around to see if it was going to return. I shot out of there like a rocket, determined to see daylight again. When I finally broke through from the depths back into reality, I almost kissed the ground. Since then, I've been wrestling with this experience. What did I see? What's hiding beneath Yellowstone? Where do I go from here? I'm looking over my shoulder, questioning my role here every day since this encounter. Living and working in Yellowstone National Park has never been the same for me. But one thing's for sure, though. The park's image of picturesque landscapes and simmering geysers might be just the top layer of something far more surreal and wild than we ever thought. Till next time, Donovan. Wish me luck. Stan. Hey there, Donovan. I wanted to share this story with you from a few years back, during a chilly night here in Yellowstone National Park. First off, let me tell you that there are 2 types of night shifts when you're a park ranger. The kind where the loneliness and the silence get to you, and the kind that you can't explain, the kind that makes you think about all sorts of things you would rather not. There's a certain serenity to the park at night, this feeling of peace that just envelops you. As an experienced park ranger and a true nature lover, I'd felt it numerous times, that certain tranquility that could only be found with a million stars above, and the smell of evergreens all around. There was something sacred about the wild during the witching hours. It was your most intimate encounter with Mother Nature. Working the night shift wasn't all bad, though. It certainly gives you a lot of time for reflection, and the solitude can be quite comforting. I've always felt a sense of responsibility towards the park, my duty to guard it against all threats. Not just the physical threats like poachers or careless tourists, but the invisible ones too. The night shift generally involved me making rounds, checking the park's perimeter, and patrolling nearby areas, including some of the lesser tread paths. There's a surveillance system in place as well, where you can monitor various places across the park. All in all, it was mostly peaceful, save for some occasional animal noises in the background. On full moon nights, the park would be bathed in a haunting glow, trees casting long, gnarly shadows, everything looking a bit ethereal. This particular night was just like any other. The moon was clear but not too bright. The stars were twinkling like crazy. It seemed as though the whole park was asleep. The elk, the bison, even the wolves seemed to be taking the night off. Everything was calm. The wind hummed gently, shushing the trees. It was the kind of calm that was eerie, the one that felt like something was about to happen. I shrugged the feeling off, attributing it to the quiet stillness. The calm before the storm, I thought. Little did I know what storm awaited me. I was in the middle of my normal duties, monitoring various cameras installed throughout the park. The screen seemed to be playing a monochrome slideshow of desolate scenes. Some long-limbed shadows over an empty clearing, the waterfall cascading into the river with no one to hear her, trails snaking into the darkness that held untold mysteries. I stared at them, caught up in the odd beauty of the park at night. It was time to start the nocturnal patrol. I grabbed the keys to the patrol vehicle and zipped up my jacket as the winter chill had started to bite. As I stepped out of the warm cocoon of the office, the cold night air greeted me like a long-lost friend. It was time to shake off the nocturnal serenity, time to perk up the senses and embrace the other side of night shifts, the side that had given me enough goosebumps for a lifetime. After stepping out of the station into the night, I realized something felt different. On a regular night, sounds of the woods became a part of you. You can hear the rhythm, the whistling wind, the creek's soft murmur, the rustling leaves. They whisper secrets only a trained ear can understand. The shadows moved when they were supposed to, giving away lurking animals or fluttering birds. But that night, it felt like things were hiding. Then the first strange thing happened. My flashlight flickered as though the battery was dying, but I knew I'd changed them recently. I whacked it against my hand a few times. You know, the good old-fashioned way to fix things. It steadied but gradually dimmed to a faint glow that barely pierced the darkness. The second anomaly came shortly. As I was patrolling, I heard a whisper. It was odd, like a hiss in the wind. Its origin unknown. Its intention unclear, but the presence was palpable. No one was around, yet I felt watched, like an intruder stepping into a domain where he didn't belong. I brushed the uneasy feelings off as jitters from being alone at night. Yet, in my truck, unease turned to dread. The averted shadows, flickering lights, and eerie whispers coalesced into a word I hadn't once even thought of associating with Yellowstone: haunted. Suddenly, the peace and tranquility felt more like a hollow echo of something long lost. Throughout the night, the phenomena continued. Whispering winds seemed to carry lost souls' tales. My equipment was manipulated by unseen forces, and the shadows danced of their own accord. I even started sensing cold spots. The longest night of my life somehow managed to turn into dawn. Its first light seemed to banish the unseen, the abnormal. The awful presence seemed to fade with the darkness. In the end, it was just me, the same park ranger, in the same park, around the same time. Only now, there was a clear before and after associated with the night. With sunrise, things went back to normal. Nobody believed my story, attributing it to the loneliness and isolation of a nighttime park ranger. I wish they were right. The thing about encountering something like this, it sticks with you. The whispering wind is now a constant reminder. The cool breeze now feels like that ghostly chill. And the darkness, well, I am now on daytime shifts only. The whole encounter has made me question the park, the safety, even my own sanity. And that's my story, Donovan. Feel free to share it with others. Heck, maybe someone out there can explain what I experienced. I hope they can. I'm an outdoors type of guy. I love the crisp, clear air, the rustling sounds of the forest, the silent conversations trees seem to have when the wind blows. I could spend hours walking under the towering pines, just for a chance to catch a glimpse of a rare bird or a deer grazing. You could probably guess that I would be the one to have an encounter in the woods with a creature that's hard to describe, hard to believe even. That's why I decided to write in. My story starts in Baxter State Park, Maine, an absolute gem of natural beauty, hidden away up north, the perfect place for my solitary walks, where I often lose myself in the vastness of the forest and the grandeur of the mountain. Now, I don't expect everyone to understand why I spend my precious time in the middle of nowhere, usually alone. But to me, the solitude soothes and refreshes me. No flashing screens, no ringing phones, no hardcore bosses, just me and nature. So there I was, just another beautiful day in the park. I parked my Jeep, grabbed my backpack, and started my journey into the woods. Bird watching, hiking, the occasional examination of interesting foliage. I had no particular itinerary planned that day. By the time the sun was directly overhead, I'd made my way to a small clearing that gave me a great view of the surrounding trees. I decided to settle down there for a while, to enjoy my lunch and observe an oddly active squirrel. The park was engulfed in a soothing calm. The air smelled of earth and greenery, but suddenly I felt a shift. It's hard to explain in words, But just like before a thunderstorm, when the heavy silence gives way to an electric tension, the atmospheric shift was tangible. My cheerful squirrel went silent. The birds ceased their singing. And there was this odd thickness to the air, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then, a strange smell cut through the forest air. It was like sulfur. I chalked it up to be a geothermal occurrence, or maybe a decaying carcass nearby, but the timing of it was too odd to be a coincidence. Right when everything was going quiet, and then suddenly this smell appeared. There was definitely something going on here, even though I didn't want to admit it at the time. Shaking off the creeping unease, I packed my stuff and pushed on, deeper into the woods. I had no idea that I was walking straight towards a confrontation that would leave me questioning the very fabric of reality. I started to hear sounds, rustling leaves, dry branches cracking under pressure. Something was in the woods with me, something big from the sound of it, and the smell was stronger too, choking the fresh forest air. Uncertain what it was, I proceeded with caution, suspense building up with each hesitant step. That's when I first saw its shadow, a silhouette, tall and bizarrely shaped, with features that didn't seem to belong to any one animal. I could discern a large figure, the height of a bear maybe, but thinner. I held my breath, focusing on the source of the disturbance, and braced myself for an encounter with a hungry bear. But that isn't what stepped out into the clearing in front of me. The creature that stood before me was something that made me question my own eyes and even my sanity. It was tall, about 9 feet high. The body seemed skeletal, like the exterior of an exoskeleton, but had a scaled skin texture. It looked like a strange amalgamation of different creatures. The head of a goat or perhaps a deer, with the body of a lizard and the wings of a bat. The creature had an exterior skull, giving it a demonic, terrifying appearance. Its eyes were like a strange goblin creature's, glowing yellow in the shade of the trees. A shiver ran down my spine as my eyes took in the bizarre sight. It was absurd, unbelievable. My rational mind cycled through possibilities. A trick of the light, a forest fire-induced hallucination. But the eerie smell of sulfur hung heavily in the air, like a dark perfume that underscored the monstrous reality standing before me. As the creature shifted, light cascading across its scaled skin, I realized this was no hallucination. It started to move toward me and I ran. I sprinted through the forest, my breath ragged. I didn't stop until I couldn't smell the strange sulfur stench anymore. When I finally stopped, panting and shaking, the forest returned to its usual chorus of pleasant sounds. I'd outrun the creature, if that was even possible. Or more likely, it decided not to chase me for whatever reason. Wrapping my mind around the encounter was another colossal task altogether. Could I go back to the park after that? Could I ever enjoy the solitude of nature again knowing such things existed? These were some of the questions flowing through my mind as I hastily packed my things and left. I wanted out of the woods, out of the park. Back home, the encounter kept replaying in my head. But would anyone believe me if I told them I encountered this thing? Would they think I'm insane, delirious, or worse? Even now, as I write this to you, I question if what I saw was real or just a figment of my imagination. Was the smell just some previously unknown geothermal activity in the area? I don't have answers, but I do know that in my solitary walks, I'll be on guard now more than I've ever been. Not just against the mundane wildlife, but against the mythological as well. I've got a crazy story for you, and it's one that still gives me goosebumps to this day. Some days I struggle to believe it myself. It happened about 3 years ago, out in Kodachrome Basin State Park, Utah. If you don't know it already, that place is a nature photographer's playground. Red rock pillars rising straight from the ground and sandstone chimneys pigmented with a myriad of colors. I've been a photography enthusiast for years now, and when I finally got some time off work, I decided to head out west. It was an overwhelming experience to be amidst such unsullied beauty. So, I reached the park, checked into my cabin, and without wasting any time, started exploring. I'd packed my trusty old Canon and tripod for the trip. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it worked well enough for me. I felt a sense of peace in that landscape that I hadn't felt in a while. I decided to hike up to Shakespeare Arch first, the largest natural arch in the park. From there, I could see miles of desert terrain baking in the afternoon sun. After a tiring day of shooting pictures and exploring, I decided to take a break. So, I set up my gear under the arch and sat down to rest, watching the sun's golden light starting to mellow, turning the desert and the pillars a softer hue in the evening light. It was breathtaking. Suddenly, my camera started acting funky. I was making a strange noise and the screen started flickering. I figured it was a battery issue, so I turned it off and decided to pack up my stuff. It was then I felt an odd chill run down my back. It was a clear day, not a hint of rain, let alone a storm. But the air shifted. It got cooler, heavier. And then I saw it. High up in the sky, I noticed a bright light moving erratically. It was just a tiny dot at first, but it grew larger and brighter as it drew closer. Now, I'm no expert on aircraft, but this thing moved weird. It wasn't like a normal plane or helicopter. I marveled at it, confusion giving way to fascination. There was a negative glow around it, subtle at first, but as it came closer, the entire object illuminated the sky in a metallic sheen. Now, I've seen drones, I've seen all sorts of aircraft in my city life, but nothing like this. This was a UFO kind of sighting, I'm sure of it. But how was I supposed to explain that to anyone? They just paint me as a guy who spent his day baking in the desert sun. But I swear to you, I wasn't hallucinating. It was there. As the object suddenly seemed to slow down, things went eerily quiet around me. I held my breath, my heartbeat almost audible in the absolute silence. I couldn't look away. For all I knew, I was about to be abducted or something. Then, everything changed in a flash, literally. From out of nowhere, a surge of light blinded me momentarily. And when I regained my vision, the biggest damn shock of my life awaited me. Hanging perfectly still about 50 yards above me was this behemoth of a thing, just hovering in midair. It was massive, larger than the biggest jetliner I'd ever seen. Yet, it was silent, completely quiet. It was like it was a ghost. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The thing was round, like a disc. It was sleek, metallic, and silver gray, reflecting the last bit of sunshine in the sky. The center had pulsating lights, alternating in color: red, blue, green, yellow, like some psychedelic Christmas decoration. But most bizarre was its movement. It hovered 1 minute and then would do a sharp spin or an abrupt jerk, defying everything I knew about aerodynamics. Stuffing down the rising panic, I fumbled for my camera, hoping to capture the spectacle. But the camera was still out of commission, completely dead. Cursing under my breath, I fell to the instinctive urge of the modern man and pulled out my cell phone and started filming. But before I could hit the button to start the video, I felt a bizarre push. It's hard to explain, but it felt as if something invisible was shoving me away. More like a force field generated by the object. Stumbling backward, I still couldn't take my eyes off that crazy UFO. Suddenly, it darted across the sky, zooming off into the horizon faster than any aircraft I'd ever seen. Blink and you'd miss it fast. One moment it was there, the next, gone. The silent desert returned. It took me a while to gather my wits. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and my palms were sweaty. My mind swam with questions. The sinking sun reminded me of the passing hours. Gathering my gear, I trudged back to my cabin, my mind filled with the day's happenings. I barely slept a wink that night, replaying the encounter again and again. The whole thing felt surreal. Next morning, I had to refund my park fees and head back to the city. The quiet desert, once so inviting, now was too much for me to confront. I've been back in the urban jungle for a while now, but the effect of that day hasn't ebbed one bit. Had big plans to showcase the amazing shots I took that day, but the camera never recovered. Told a few fellow shutterbugs about my strange encounter, but all I got were good-natured laughs and an exhortation to keep hydrated while on desert shoots. And that was that. I haven't seen anything like it since. I'd like to share one of the stranger experiences I've had in my life. And trust me, I've had a few. This one happened a few years back when I decided to take a day off and visit Palouse Falls State Park in Washington State. Now, if you've never been to Palouse Falls, it's worth the trip. Naturally carved over eons by the mighty Palouse River, the falls drop 200 stunning feet into the churning whitewater below. The raw beauty of the place, especially on a sunny day, is good enough to take your breath away. I was going through a bit of a rough patch at the time. Personal issues, work stress, the world weighing heavy on me. I just needed to get away for a few days and breathe some clean air. This park had been a childhood favorite of mine, and nostalgia and a wish for simpler times called me back. I'd gotten there just after sunrise. Now, if pictures have never done justice to anything, it was to the sunrise that occurs over the Palouse. It was just me, my thoughts, and the great expanse of the river. I spent the morning exploring the park, taking a long hike along the riverbank. As the sun started to dip in the afternoon, I settled down in a quiet spot overlooking the falls. Listening to the perpetual roar of the waterfall, my mind started to wander. Suddenly, I realized, as if in a dream, that the backdrop of water crashing into rocks was underscored by an odd noise. Initially, I brushed it off as nothing more than the result of my overactive imagination. Yet, as the sound persisted, it started to resemble more of a distinct rhythm, almost like something nearby was breathing heavily. Only, it wasn't coming from any wildlife I knew, or coming from the falls. It was the unmistakable sound of a large creature taking deep, long breaths. As soon as I registered what I was hearing, my heart raced, and I was overcome with a chill. Instinctively, I rose to my feet, readying myself for what could be out there in the bush. Now, here's where I should probably clarify. I'm not one known to get frightened easily. I've spent my fair share of time trekking, camping, and even hunting in the wilds, and I've seen the unpredictable side of nature. Some really strange stuff. But this was about to take the cake. The air felt heavier all of a sudden, thick with a certain discomfort that I can only describe as a very strong need to escape. It was as if every instinct in my body was telling me to move, to leave, that I was not alone and certainly not in good company. The sound then seemed to shift, altering from deep breaths into a soft growl, then back again. As I held my breath, fearing it could hear me, the sound continued, not growing louder or quieter, but appearing somehow nearer than it was a few moments ago. And yet, I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. The twilight's creeping shadows gave the unsettling feeling of a presence, hiding, watching even. I tried to convince my brain it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew it was more, something bigger, ominous even. Then, as I was scanning the tree line, I finally saw it, a tall, looming figure perched on a rocky outcrop. Its body was large, almost human-like, but with a hunched posture. It was draped in what seemed like black feathers, appearing smooth yet strangely angular in the waning light. And as I was registering the unusual silhouette, two crimson points suddenly flashed in my direction, completely devoid of warmth and cutting through the dim evening like lighthouses in a foggy night. I've locked eyes with predators before, but this was different. It was as if those glowing red orbs could see inside me, like they knew I was petrified. My brain was screaming at me to move, to run, but my legs refused to obey. The entity, or creature, then unfurled something enormous and dark, dimming the twilight even further. It was only then that I realized what it was. A set of wings, gargantuan and leathery, outstretched against the evening sky. The sight was terrifying, but at the same time, I wanted so badly to know what I was looking at. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like an eternity. A sudden snapping twig behind me broke my trance, and in an instant, the adrenaline kicked in, propelling me out of the clearing, through the thicket and toward my car. I remember stumbling over roots and rocks, my lungs burning from exertion, but fear kept me going. I wanted to know what it was, but my body somehow knew that I was in danger. Since that day, I've struggled to make sense of what I saw. At first, I thought it might have been a dream or some sort of hallucination. Maybe the stress got to me. Maybe I was imagining things. But every time I close my eyes, I can still see those crimson red eyes staring right into my soul. For weeks, I avoided going outside. Nature seemed to have lost some of its allure for me, and instead in its place was a pervasive sense of foreboding. Over time, however, I regained some of my nerve. I started taking short hikes, but never alone, and never at dusk. Sometimes things thought to be empty legends turn out to be anything but, and I don't have any intention to find out if any of the other tales of monsters are real or not. I think I'll leave that task to someone else.